Okay, good morning. My name is Argo Vermeer, and welcome to Collectivism Kills. We're going to continue with our atheism series today, and I'm going to talk about the tautological nature of atheism. So, atheism as its own definition, and how atheism self nullifies. And now, I understand that some people might think that these are overly complicating the issue, and maybe I'm just not being clear enough, and I'm difficult to understand, and I get that. I think part of the reason why people struggle sometimes to understand where I'm coming from is two reasons. One is I'm not the greatest speaker in the world. I'm neither Barack Obama I'm not a great speech maker, but I'm also not Donald Trump, where I speak on a second grade level. So yeah, I don't present ideas necessarily in simple terms with a great with a great capacity for oratory. Um, but I do believe that the other part of the problem is that people don't realize how complicated this issue is. It really is not as black and white as we like to think. Atheists like to think we're just a passive observer, so we're a judge here. This is like a courtroom trial. We're the judge, and the theists are on the hook for bringing us evidence which we will then judge to be valid or not. And that's just really not what's going on. There's no such thing as passive observation. Everybody is an atheist because there's something which informs their atheism. They decided that atheism was a more rational position because of reasons. Because they saw moral hypocrisy in the church. Because they understood that science is a better way to interpret reality and how it works. So the atheism really, once an atheist enters into the discussion, the atheism is jettisoned. And it's replaced with an implicit and perhaps hidden positive belief or positive intellectual position, which underwrites the atheism. Again, it could be their scientific determinism. It could be they have a different ethical interpretation than the theist does. But there's some reason why an atheist is an atheist. And again, that's what they're going to pull from as soon as they enter the conversation. Beyond the claim, I do not believe God exists, atheism has nothing to say about the matter. So once the atheist offers more to the conversation, to the debate than that, even to simply say the burden of proof is on you, they are drawing from some underlying assumptions that they have. They're not drawing from atheism. And that's my whole point. I'm not trying to prove that theism is right. I'm not trying to prove that atheism is wrong. Or I'm not trying to prove that atheists are wrong. I'm not arguing that God is right and atheists are wrong and they're going to hell. I'm not doing any of this. I'm simply saying that atheism in itself, atheism qua atheism, is irrelevant. In that once people start to understand that, we can have the real conversation. And once people, like theists in particular, stop accepting the burden of proof and recognize that atheists have their own intellectual obligation in the conversation, that if the theist is on the hook for defending their beliefs, then so is the theist. And that what we really have here is a disagreement about the sum and substance and nature of reality, its cause, its source, and how it works, and everything that it implies. The theists say it's God, the atheists say it's not God because it's something else. But they never get to the something else because then they'd actually have to defend it. And unfortunately, my interpretation or my understanding of atheism is that it's more interested in shutting down the opposition really than actually having the debate. So, so we're going to go through the tautology of atheism, and we're going to start by have a sort of etymological examination of atheism. Now, I know atheists like to prevaricate on the definition. They like to sort of play fast and loose. You can never kind of nail down an atheist on their definition. And this is a kind of dialectical or rhetorical game they like to play. Well, atheism it's not really a disbelief. It doesn't really have anything to do with the belief or not. It's just a rejection of the existence of God and nothing more than that. And to assume that atheist has anything to do with believing or disbelieving so they like to play this kind of rhetorical game. So you can't really nail down what actually atheism is, which kind of makes sense because atheism in and of itself is nothing at all. But of course, if atheism itself is nothing at all, then it has nothing to offer the conversation, and therefore atheists shouldn't get involved. But for all intents and purposes for now, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, we'll talk about how atheists like to play fast and loose with the definition of atheism. as a way to kind of wiggle out from their intellectual obligation, either explicitly or implicitly. I'm not saying atheists do this all consciously or on purpose, but that's the effect when you're attempting to argue from an intellectual vacuum like atheism. Atheism being simply the obverse side of theism. So it's just the negative side of the theistic coin. So you have belief in God on one hand and disbelief on the other hand. So the idea that you're going to separate that side of the coin, I believe in God on one side, I don't believe in God on the other side, and taking the not belief and sort of extracting that to be its own thing, you're left with this intellectual vacuum, this void, this not. Okay, and so to attempt to make that your intellectual position is not actually saying anything, and it's hard to, and you can't really define it because it's not really there. But anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. But anyway, for all intents and purposes for right now, we're going to define atheism like everybody, even atheists, understand it. I know, sorry if there's been some scratching noise, the paper got close to the microphone there. Even atheists understand that when we talk about atheism, what we really mean is someone who doesn't believe in the existence of God or gods or the supernatural. This is what it is. So I know atheists love to prevaricate and equivocate on the definition, but just go with me for now. So if the theist says, I believe in God, the atheist will say, I disbelieve in God. Okay? Just go with me for now. We all understand this is what the atheist is saying. So let's break this statement down into its fundamental sort of etymological roots, for lack of a better term. So atheism will say, I disbelieve in God. Or said another way, I believe there is no God. So we switch the negative. So instead of the negative being attached to believe, we attach the negative to God. So instead of I disbelieve in God, we'll say, I believe there is no God. In other words, we could say, this translates into I believe in not God. So atheism is simply the obverse side of the theistic coin, in some sense, right? It's just the negative proposition. I believe in God. And the atheist side of the coin is I believe in not God. So you have God and then you have not God. These are two sides of this coin here. So the atheist will say, I believe there's no God, or I believe there is not God. Or, and getting to what's really fundamentally being said, is the theist says, I believe in God. The obverse side of that, the negative proposition, is I believe in not God. That's all atheism is. Theism, I believe in God. Atheism is simply I believe in not God. And that's it. There's nothing more to atheism than that. That's all atheism is. Not God. That's it. On the theistic side of the coin, we have God. On the other side of the coin, we have not God. That's all atheism is. Therefore, anytime an atheist offers anything to the debate or conversation beyond simply not God, they're not speaking from atheism. They're speaking from something else, from some other fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of ethics, the nature of truth. They're not speaking from atheism, because all atheism is not God. That's it. So if we talk about, we make this sort of relative to existence, the theist will say, I believe in God. The atheist will say, I believe in not God. Okay, I already said that. Sorry. I got confused with my notes. Okay, so we're talking about so if we include existence, then the atheist claim becomes this. So if the theist says, sorry, I'm all over the place. Hold on. If the theist says, I believe God exists, then the obverse side, the other side of that coin, the negative proposition to that would be, which is what atheism is, would be I believe not God exists. So the theist will say, I believe God exists. The atheist says, I believe not God exists. Okay? And that's all. Again, that's all atheism is. Atheism is just not God. It's just the obverse. It's just the negative side. It's just the negative proposition to the theistic claim God exists. Atheism says not God exists. Theism says God. Atheism says not God. That's it. That's all atheism says. That's all atheism is. That's all it is. It's nothing more than that. Anything more than that is one of two things. It's either an appeal to something they do believe, which has nothing to do with atheism, or it's the reason why they're an atheist, or it's rhetorical and dialectical trickery. It's prevarication, it's sophistry, it's casuistry. It's an attempt to actually get out from that. It's an attempt to wiggle out and wriggle out from their own intellectual obligation to defend their own ideas. That's all. If the atheist says anything more than not God, they're either trying to get out of their own intellectual obligation, or they're implicitly appealing to some kind of belief that they have which underwrites their atheism, meaning the reason why they're an atheist. And so you as the theist would then go, you would need to examine that. You would understand that they are on the hook for defending that belief, the belief which underwrites their atheism. If they're an atheist because they believe that Christians are moral hypocrites, you would have the right to ask them why they think this and what their definition of morality is. And what are their ethical propositions which underwrite their belief that God is not moral? Or if they believe that God has nothing to do with the nature of reality and how it works, it's all scientifically determined, you would have the right as a theist to go, explain to me your metaphysics, or explain to me your physics. Explain to me why. Explain to me how you interpret reality. Rationally defend your position on how reality works then. The theist would be obligated to. But you see, once we get past atheism, the burden of proof is shared. The burden of proof is only on the theist if the atheism is arguing from its null position of not God. Because not God isn't an intellectual position. It's a vacuum. And so, yeah, there's nothing to defend because there's nothing there. So they can tell you the burden of proof is on you, the theist, but it's hypocritical. Because since this negative or this intellectual void of atheism, this negative proposition, is an intellectual vacuum, it's not underwritten by any epistemology, which means it doesn't have a definition of evidence or proof. So it wouldn't recognize it even if you gave it to it. So yeah, while atheists can on the technical level tell you that the burden of proof is on you, the theist, it's very hypocritical to do so. And it just represents a shirking of their own intellectual obligation. So, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, moving on from that, I don't know how much of this I'll get to today, but now, the other day I typed in, let's talk about how atheism defines their term, how atheism defines atheism. And this will go to why atheism is fundamentally tautological and therefore self-nullifying. Atheism becomes its own definition. What is not God? Not God is not God. That's the fundamental tautology, because atheism is a negative position. It represents an intellectual void. So it doesn't have a definition beyond itself. It's just not God. So atheism is atheism. What is the definition of atheism? Atheism. It's tautological in that sense. But I typed into Google the other day, is atheism a negative belief? And what I got back from Google AI was this, and this just goes to show you that, well, we all know that AI is programmed. AI is not conscious. AI is not sentient. If you want to hear something interesting, Roger Penrose does something about, he did an interview. He's a real famous English mathematician and physicist and Nobel Prize winner and super mega turbo genius. And he does an interview about how AI is not conscious and can't be conscious, or won't be conscious and can't be conscious. They're very fascinating. And while, again, he's another scientist and mathematician who, once they sort of venture into the realm of philosophy, it all falls apart, because typically this is just my opinion, my perspective. My experience has told me that the better you are at science and math, the worse you are at philosophy, philosophical thinking, or rational consistency. So when he begins to kind of LARP as a philosopher, it kind of falls apart pretty quick. But because he's a turbo genius, his explication as to why AI is not conscious and can't be conscious rings very true, and it's fascinating. It's really, because he knows math. This guy knows math, and he knows rules, and he knows the fundamentals from which AI spring. He knows where AI comes from. Rules-based computation. So anyway, if you want to understand why AI is not conscious and won't be and is programmed, listen to Roger Penrose, because he'll tell you, and it's fascinating. But okay, so I typed into Google, is atheism a negative belief? And I got this little interesting gem. Now, Google AI doesn't always give you the same definition twice, which is interesting, because I typed it in again a couple of days later, and I got something different. It was kind of the same, but it wasn't worded the same, which I thought was interesting. So, in other words, the definitions can shift from day to day, which is kind of scary, because it can mean something one day, but it might not quite mean the exact same thing the next day, as far as Google AI is concerned, and as far as Google AI will tell you. So, anyway, I said, is atheism a negative belief? And Google AI said that atheism is not in itself a negative belief, which I thought was interesting. I'm not surprised, but because atheists have always told me for a long time that atheism does not represent a positive belief claim, and that it is a negative belief claim. And that's why there was no burden of proof on the atheist, because it wasn't proposing anything, because it was a negative belief. So, but AI, Google told me this is not true. Google told me that atheism is not itself a negative belief, but that it is a position which does not affirm the existence of the supernatural, but is not inherently an active denial or belief in the absence of gods. That's an interesting definition of atheism. On one hand, it talks about the supernatural. In the next breath, it talks about the absence of gods. God and the supernatural are not necessarily synonymous. They're not equivalent. God doesn't necessarily imply supernatural. If you understand what God really is, at least in the Christian sense, God would be more like ultra-natural. God is the root, the sum and substance, the cause and creator of all that exists. So he wouldn't be supernatural. He would be entirely natural. He would be that from which all which is natural springs, in which case this would make everything natural a direct function of God, which means God would be the sum and substance of what we consider natural. It wouldn't be supernatural or above nature or different from nature. God is entirely, if you understand what God is, at least in the Christian sense, natural. This simply because he can do things that maybe humans can't do doesn't make him supernatural. It's just that he's able to use nature in a way that perhaps humans can't. But this is not the same thing as being supernatural or above the natural in the technical sense. So the point is that the supernatural doesn't have anything necessarily to do with God, which is interesting given that Google AI definition. But anyway, so what this amounts to, this definition that atheism is not in itself a negative belief, but that it's a position which does not affirm the existence of the supernatural, but is not inherently an active denial or belief in the absence of gods. This is just more of this atheist rhetorical and dialectical trickery going on here. Remember, Google AI is programmed. Doesn't think for itself. So it's not surprising that it would engage in the same kind of atheist trickery, because it's going to understand atheism as atheists tell you. Google will interpret atheism in the way that atheists have told it should be interpreted. So this definition is just rhetorical, it's dialectical trickery. It really is telling us that atheists get to have their cake and eat it too. On the one hand, we are told that atheism is not a negative belief or a null belief, the absence or void of belief, because it's not an active denial or belief in gods. That is, it's not a position that believes or disbelieves. But on the other hand, it is a position which does not affirm the existence of the supernatural. We'll just say God right here, because that's what it really means. So on the one hand, it's not a position that believes or disbelieves, but on the other hand, it is a position which does not affirm the existence of God. So it rejects the existence of God, but it doesn't have any reason why. That's really what they're saying. They're saying, I reject the existence of God, but I don't have any real reason for this, and therefore there's nothing for me to defend. I can just say it, and it's true, but because I don't have anything which underwrites this assertion, I don't really believe in it. It's not underwritten by any specific ideas that I agree with or accept or believe or disbelieve. I don't actually have to defend it. You see, it gets to have its cake and eat it too. So this is these kind of sort of conceptual gymnastics that atheists you see after you deal with them for a while. These conceptual gymnastics that atheists go through to avoid any intellectual responsibility. And this really tells you in no uncertain terms that when atheists are operating from atheism, it's really nothing more than an ideology. It's very cult-like. It's a lot of doublespeak. It's a lot of avoiding intellectual obligation. It's a lot of refusing to answer questions. And it reminds me very much of the kinds of Christians that I ran into when I was struggling, not with my faith, but I was struggling with the metaphysics. I never struggled with faith because I was never tempted to go, well, the problem's definitely God. I understood that, there's some doctrinal interpretive lens that we're bringing to the Bible. We have some metaphysical assumptions about God and his nature. And I started to go, there's real problems in the church, and there's a lot of hypocrisy. Is this a problem with God, or is this a problem with how man is interpreting what he's being told? Does man come to, or do Christians come to the Bible with some preconceived metaphysical assumptions? Do they come to the Bible with this preconceived doctrinal lens and force the Bible into it, or force God into it? And so when I started asking questions, I would get the same kind of response as I get from atheists. A lot of like, well, they didn't really want to define their terms. I just didn't really understand. They didn't really have anything to defend because they were right, because God is right. And the Bible says it, so it's true. And therefore, the burden of proof is on me. I have to prove myself to them. They're right just because they are. They're coming to the debate from a position of absolute certainty. And therefore, the only way I'll agree with you is if you have some evidence which comports to my interpretation of how things are. It's very similar to dealing with atheists, I'm just saying, is very similar to dealing with Christians when I was struggling with the metaphysics, when I was struggling with the doctrine. I was trying to get at what they were actually really saying. What was it that they really believed? Because I was seeing some things that didn't make sense. And what I got was an awful lot of pushback, an awful lot of sophistry and prevarication and equivocation and ad hominem attacks and non sequitur criticisms, and things that I see in the comment section of my videos sometimes, and dealing with atheists sort of out in the real world. It's very similar. It's very eerily similar experience. And and of course, so when you start to look up the definition of atheism, and you see the kinds of definitions you're offered, and you see the kind of the intrinsic contradiction, and the mask falls off, and you realize this is just an attempt to avoid any intellectual responsibility. It reveals itself to be very ideological, very cult-like, a lot of doublespeak, and it's very eerie, the similarities between the church and atheism that I have experienced as one who is questioning both of their fundamental assumptions. I'm questioning the assumptions of atheists, and I'm questioning the assumptions of Christians, and I get basically the same response. We don't have any assumptions. We believe because we believe. Or our position is what our position is, period. We're right because we're right. The burden proof is always on you and never on me. You either agree with me or you're wrong. And very eerily similar. But anyway, I'll summarize this kind of atheistic definitional doublespeak for you here. So, well, I already did. Atheism rejects the existence of the supernatural, but it does not offer any specific reason why in and of itself, and thus cannot be said to be making a claim of any kind, and therefore cannot be said to be either a belief or disbelief. So you see the intrinsic sort of intellectual hypocrisy there, right? Okay. So atheism, which posits no claims of its own to anything and thus does not constitute any sort of intellectual position, has no reason, no belief, no truth, no knowledge, which underwrites and informs its rejection of the supernatural, in this case, God. Atheists mean God. They think that God and the supernatural are synonymous. They're not necessarily, but atheists believe this, and so we're just going to go with it. So when you see supernatural in the way atheists define themselves, understand that they mean this to mean God. Okay, so atheism, which posits no claims of its own to anything and thus does not constitute any sort of intellectual position, has no reason, no belief, no truth, no knowledge, which underwrites and informs its rejection of God, and thus it possesses no intrinsic epistemological framework, and thus possesses no inherent basis for its rejection of God. This makes atheism a null position, a negative intellectual perspective, or you could say a negative belief claim, or a negative claim. So yes, atheism is a negative belief claim. It is. It can rationally be interpreted to be a negative belief claim. I don't care what AI, Google tells you. To say that atheism is a negative belief claim is correct. So the atheists that have been telling me this all along have not been lying to me. Atheism then is reduced to a tautology. Atheism is atheistic because it is atheism. The definition of atheism is atheism, with no underwriting epistemology and no underwriting reason for why it rejects the existence of God. It becomes entirely tautological. Why is atheism atheism? Because it's atheism. That's it. Again, going back to what I said before, I hope I'm not shaking something or making noise here. Okay. All atheism is simply not God. That's it. Anything else the atheist offers to the conversation, they are not appealing to atheism anymore. They're appealing to a set of beliefs, an intrinsic epistemological framework, and they are obligated to defend it just like the theist is. Okay. So blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the definition of atheism is atheism, and this is precisely the same kind of logical fallacy. Sorry, I'm getting a knocking here. It's really bugging me because I don't want it coming through on the video. Okay, the definition of atheism is atheism. This is precisely the same kind of logical fallacy which informs much. This is just where I go. It sounds like Christian apologetics. Anyway. Okay. So like atheism is atheism. Atheists are atheists because they're atheists. Atheism is atheistic because it's atheism. So it reminds me of what my mother-in-law used to say to me. My mother-in-law used to say, I believe because I believe. The Bible said it, so I believe it. I believe it because the Bible said it. Atheism doesn't believe in God because it's atheism. Same kind of thing. It's the same kind of rationality here. So, and I already talked about the conflating the supernatural with God, blah, 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 blah. That's irrelevant. Okay. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Hold on. That was too quick. Blah, blah, blah. Where am I? Sorry about this. Of course, atheism. Sorry about this. I'm trying to find where's this? Oh, okay. Sorry. Got my notes all screwed up. All right. So I want to summarize my my presentation here. So number one, yes, atheism is a negative belief. It proceeds from a negative position. As Google AI told me, atheism is a position which does not affirm the supernatural, blah, blah, blah. So atheism proceeds from the not. It proceeds from the negative. The logical inverse of the issue in question, the existence of God. It does not affirm the existence of God. It is a negative position on the question of the existence of God. It is not God. That's it. If the theist believes in God, then by logical extension, one can say with perfect rationality that the atheist does not believe in God. It is the negative position to the positive claim, I believe in God or God exists. Okay? So atheism is a negative belief. And atheism is a disbelief in God or gods and deity, blah, blah, blah. All right. We already talked about the supernatural in God and how they conflate the two, or they try to... Anyway, we already talked about that. Okay. So let's talk about the theist. Let's talk about theism for a second here. Here is the philosophical framework fleshed out for you. The corollaries with respect to theism, this positive belief claim in the existence of God, the corollaries go as follows. So we need to understand, what do we mean by God? Well, God is, at least in Christianity, and I do believe in all the three major religions, the three major monotheistic religions in the West, or West adjacent, I suppose. Well, in the West, because Islam's in the West, is Islam, right, and Judaism and Christianity. So, the belief in God. Well, what is God? God is the metaphysical primary. So this is the philosophical framework for this position. I believe in God, the theistic position. God is the metaphysical primary. God is the metaphysical framework, then, upon which the physical universe, physical reality, is established. So, in other words, physical reality is the plurality of existence, which is bound together, which can coexist by the metaphysical primary. So you have God, which is the singularity, the metaphysical primary, that implies this plurality of physical existence that we see around us. All of these different objects that can coexist. Why? Because they are bound together in their existence by the metaphysical primary. That's God. Okay? So this speaks then to the nature of reality. And this speaks then to the nature of the observer, man, the conscious agent. This then speaks to epistemology. This gives us an epistemological framework. What then is knowledge? We know what is real, and we know where it comes from. So what is knowledge? What constitutes knowledge of the real, of what is, of what exists, and of how man acquires it? And from knowledge, truth, and from truth, belief, and from knowledge, truth, and from truth, belief. And then from this, what constitutes proof of what is true, and evidence for what one believes. Okay, so you see how all these things link together. The metaphysical, to the physical, to the epistemological, to things like evidence and proof, belief and truth. So epistemology validates reality. So one's epistemology is corollary to one's understanding of the nature of reality, or the metaphysical. Well, the physical and the metaphysical. And this is rooted in the metaphysical primary, which is God. So to say I believe in God is to say I believe in God is to make a statement about the nature of reality, of man, of consciousness, of truth, of knowledge, and therefore of ethics, of morality, things like that, okay? So, using the same philosophical framework I used to describe the positive belief claim of theism, let's see what happens when we plug in the negative belief of atheism, the obverse side of that theism coin. So you have theism on one side, and then the negative. So you have the positive proposition on one side, and then the corollary, well, not corollary, but the corresponding negative on the other side. You have the positive belief claim, and then the negative belief claim. God, not God. What happens when we plug in not God? What happens when we plug in atheism? The negative belief claim. So instead of a metaphysical primary, in this case God, we get not a metaphysical primary, which means we get not a metaphysical framework, which means we do not get a description of reality and the conscious observer and the plurality of physical existence, which means we do not have an epistemological framework, which means we do not have a description of knowledge, and therefore we do not have a description of how man obtains knowledge. We do not then have any truth. We do not have any belief. We do not then have any evidence for belief, and we do not have any proof of truth or proof of that which exists. You see the problem here? Do you see then what atheism represents in itself? Atheism is simply the intellectual vacuum that remains when the belief when the positive claim is removed. In this case, the theistic claim, the theistic claim that God exists. All that atheism represents is the intellectual vacuum left when you remove the positive belief claim. That's all it is. It is simply a vacuum. It is a void. It is a zero. It is nothing. Atheism is an intellectual vacuum. It is disbelief absent any knowledge which informs it. It is disbelief without knowing why it disbelieves. It is disbelief qua disbelief. Atheism disbelieves in God because it is atheism. Because it is atheism, it disbelieves in God. It's entirely tautological. It is a logical fallacy, and therefore it cannot represent a position relative to the question, does God exist, at all. This is all atheism is in and of itself. Thus, the moment an atheist offers any opinion beyond simply the tautological atheistic claim, I don't believe God exists, or not God, he's no longer arguing from atheism. He is engaging from some underlying positive intellectual position that he is now obligated to defend. The burden of proof is not on the theist. The burden is shared by all who choose to enter into the debate or the discussion. And that's all I have to say on that. So hopefully that was interesting to you, and hopefully that made sense to you, and hopefully it was educational or enjoyable. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that for now. I have some other things to say on the matter. I mean, this whole thing is a deep well of content, and I don't mind staying right here on the atheism yarn because it's interesting to me. I certainly have lots of things I'm interested in. I would be completely happy to talk about the rational inconsistencies and fallacies of Christian metaphysics and doctrine, and I'm happy to do that too. But it seems that I've gotten on this atheism yarn, and I'm happy to stay here for now because it's fun for me and it's interesting, hopefully. And I'll do so for a while, I guess, until I've kind of exhausted either my interest in it or stuff to talk about. But all right. Well, having said that, that's all I really wanted to say. So until I talk at you later, thank you to anybody, all of you who commented. Most of them were negative and didn't agree with me, which is completely fine. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate the couple of people that subscribed. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I do this just for fun. I mean, I'm not expecting to make any money doing this, and I'm not really looking to. And so I'm not really emotionally invested in it that way. It's just because I enjoy it, and I think these ideas are important enough to at least be put out into the public space by in some fashion. So that's why I do it. But of course, it's more fun with an audience. So, I appreciate the subscriptions. And if you would like to subscribe and comment, please feel free. I don't know that I'll respond to all the comments. It gets pretty hard because topics of this nature are hard to really discuss in the comment section. And I know me, I can get real distracted, and I can spend hours in the comment section, and it's not healthy on many levels to do that. So I'm not ignoring you. Even if you're an atheist that disagrees, don't take it as ignoring me. I do read the comments, or at least skim them, because it's not like I don't care what you have to say. I do care what you have to say, but I may not respond because it's just not healthy for me. I can get really addicted to the comment section, and it's not good for me. So don't take my silence in the comment section as I'm not reading your comments, or I don't care what you have to say. So yeah, anyway, just want to say that. So, all right, don't want to go too long. Thanks a million, and until next time when I talk to you later, take care. Bye.